During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, millions of Americans who lost their jobs or were laid off, or there were closures at their jobs, well, as a result of not getting enough money, they began to fall behind on their rent. Now, in response, Congress decided to pass $1.9 trillion in stimulus. Now, again, the vast majority of it went to corporations, and even the thing that was supposed to help the renters, well, that went to, well, these big companies as well. Now, this rent relief went to landlords in order to try to keep struggling tenants in their homes. Now, all over the country, unfortunately, as I've talked about before, landlords wouldn't, well, I mean, they would take the money, but they would decide to kick out their tenants anyway. Now, here's an example. Some of this happened in Texas, but again, there are stories from all over the country of the same thing. But here's what the Texas Tribune reports. In fact, they talked about Katy resident Sherry Scott, who was kicked out of their house. She received a notice last September that she, her husband, and their 4 kids would soon be kicked out of their Katy apartment. She said employees at the complex told her not to worry about it. Well, that's interesting. So she brought up this issue. Hey, look, I got an eviction letter. What should I do with this? I can't afford it. You know, obviously we've fallen behind. It's the pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not working, and I'll get to that in a minute. What do we do? They said, don't worry about it. Totally fine. $1.9 trillion in stimulus. We'll be all right. Okay. Now, a little bit more about their situation. Scott and her husband had fallen behind on rent in June after Scott stopped working in order to take care of their youngest daughter. Their youngest daughter has Down syndrome, and of course, with that, medical bills. So obviously, that's very important. The next month, their landlord started the eviction process, even though Scott had taken the rental office's staff advice and requested help from Texas' $2 billion in federally backed rental assistance. So that was a fund given by the federal government. Now, when the state, now they were approved for this, okay, approved, and the money was actually sent. However, it went to the wrong address. Okay. Now, before that, Scott said that she spoke to the office staff and walked away believing that she didn't need to worry about the eviction because she had applied for and was approved for that relief money. And so they also said they advised her not to show up to eviction court proceedings. Now, as I mentioned, the state sent the relief check to the wrong address, but Scott said that the staff had assured her that they were working to get the money resent. So they knew it was on the way. They knew it. Scott said, quote, "I trusted them," but then added, "I guess I shouldn't have." Now, again, the situation. She said there was a problem. She went to the staff. The staff said, don't worry about it. You've applied. We know the money is on its way. It's coming. We know we're going to get paid. So, of course, we're not going to evict you. And then what happened? She was evicted. In fact, Scott had landed a new job. So she did have a job as a dietitian at a local hospital when she returned from work one afternoon in early October to find her belongings spread out across the lawn and the locks changed. They moved everything out while she was at work. Now, of course, the other thing that happened, because this is a double whammy, right? Not only did they get evicted, but their electronics that were moved out onto the lawn were stolen by thieves. She was at work. Her family wasn't there. They couldn't do anything. So now it turns out that Jeff Williams, the Harris County Justice of the Peace, had approved the eviction because Scott was not present in court. Because she was advised to not go to court by the staff of the very company that evicted her. Again, they knew the money was coming. They still took her to court. They said, don't worry about it. Evicted her by surprise, gone. And she was robbed in two different ways. Actually, no, 3 different ways. Because guess what? Landlord got their money. And they cashed a check, and they kept the money. After weeks of phone calls, a Texas rent relief program staffer told Scott that her former landlord had indeed received the rent money in mid-November in a total of more than $11,000, enough to cover the 6 months of back rent that they had owed. Scott said, quote, "They were very well informed that the money was there and it was coming to them," said Scott, who is now living in a short-term rental in Missouri City with their 4 children. Yet, quote, "They pushed us out." Scott's former landlord, Blazer Real Estate Services, a Houston property management company, did not respond to calls and emails requesting comment. An employee at Blazer's office who answered the phone declined to answer any questions because, of course. More stories, and it's very similar, by the way. 2 other landlords, like Scott's, also evicted their tenants in the period between the initial rent relief application, when they knew it was coming, and when the government money arrived, and kept it. Now that, of course, is fraud. You can't do that. If you evict somebody for back rent, you can't just keep the money under the program. Now, of course, there are ways that you could probably go after the previous landlord, whether it be through suing for back rent and things like that, to try to recoup your money. But they just took that government money that was designed to have them allow these people to stay in their homes, kicked them out, kept the money anyway. Again, that is a violation of the program's requirements, and in those cases, the check was initially sent to the wrong property and then only arrived after the tenant was kicked out. One landlord received federal money through the Texas Rent Relief Program and later chose not to renew the tenant's lease, although that happens to be legal. I'll tell you that story, give you the details on that. In order to receive federal rent relief funds through the state, landlords had to sign an agreement that forbids them from evicting tenants for non-payment during the time period covered by that assistance. But as you can see here, none of them honored that agreement. Well, okay, let's go back. None of the ones that I mentioned honored this agreement. There are others, of course, that have, but there are plenty that didn't. And yet, here's the thing. In this case, they hold all the power. These landlords do. Look, somebody who's poor and in need of this government relief money, when they get screwed over, what do you think that they can do? What's their recourse? Well, they don't have one. They don't have the money to hire a lawyer. They don't have the money to sue for wrongful eviction, especially when you look at the fact that they did owe back rent. But they were approved for money to help pay that back rent. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter. Now, there's more. This problem, as I mentioned, happens all over the country. In fact, according to the National Housing Law Project, 86% of the 119 lawyers across the country who responded to a survey gauging how the end of the federal moratorium on evictions was affecting tenants said that they had seen cases where landlords either declined to apply for assistance from rent relief programs or took their money and proceeded to kick out tenants. That program, again, is supposed to bar landlords from accepting rent relief payments after they evict a tenant. Stuart Campbell, managing attorney at Dallas Eviction Advocacy Center, speaking generally about instances in which landlords received their rent but evicted the tenants, said this, quote, "The program is the industry standard here is fraud. These landlords are the prime beneficiary of these rental assistance programs and are just en masse have been violating these provisions of the program, and on top of that, consistently lying to judges, misleading them, and securing judgments and evictions even when they're receiving the funds." Now, you would think obvious fraud is obvious. Wouldn't the government do something about this? Shouldn't they? Again, this is misappropriation of the funds and against the law, right? Well, it turns out that a collection of state and federal agencies, including something called the TDHCA, are tasked with looking into allegations of fraud, waste, and abuse in rent relief programs. This happens to be in Texas. Now, none of the agencies, however, contacted by the Tribune would say whether any landlord has been credibly accused of taking rent relief money and improperly ousting their tenants, or whether they have imposed penalties on landlords for doing so. So look, maybe they're like, we're not going to comment on this. Or maybe they're just like, no, we haven't had anything. We're not going to tell you. Or maybe we just haven't had any. Maybe we're just not investigating at all. Maybe we're funded by the real estate industry. Maybe we're funded by these people. I don't know. I don't know the situation. Now, let me give you more information here. In fact, some tenants who spoke to the Tribune about their cases said that they had called a hotline used to report fraud, waste, and abuse in the state rent relief program, but never heard back about their complaints. Oh, you see, they misunderstood what that was about. You see, that waste, fraud, and abuse hotline, that's not to report landlords. No. That entire thing was designed to report regular people, to report renters. That's what that was about. Because they're assumed to have been doing all the fraud. The poor people, the renters, who are trying to stay in their homes, in their apartments. Oh, of course those people are fraud because they need government money. But instead, they get inundated with calls about, hey, my landlord just stole all this money and kicked me out. Oh, well, we're not really designed for that. Sorry, not really our job. No, we're supposed to come after you, not the landlords. In fact, here's another example here. Stephanie Gates, who was evicted in January after applying for rent relief at the property manager's urging. The property owner then cashed the check after she had been kicked out in March. Stephanie Gates, once again, her rental assistance check went to the wrong address and reached her landlord less than 2 weeks after she was evicted from her Round Rock home in January. They took, that former landlord, again, took the money. And they're not supposed to. Now, landlords who received rent relief dollars cannot evict their tenants for any reason related to rent or fees during the time covered by the funds, according to the program requirements. But those are the exact grounds that Gates' landlord company, the RDRH Holdings, cited when it sued to evict her. According to the program rules laid out by the agreement Gates' landlord signed on July 13th to receive the funding, if a landlord receives rent relief money after evicting the tenant, they're supposed to send the money back to TDHCA within 10 days. As of February 17th, Gates' former landlord had not done so. Gates, for her, basically she told the Tribune, quote, I was a good tenant. You know, we just had the problems from the pandemic last year, which everybody did. Taking advantage of normal people to get federal money. Because of course. Oh, but the next story. One more here. This is Diana Johnson, 35 years old. She was waiting on rent relief in January when her landlord tried to evict her and her 7 children from their 3-bedroom apartment. Johnson, a manager of a hair salon and certified nursing assistant, had asked the program in October for help covering rent while she recovered from giving birth to her son and was unable to work. Texas rent relief approved her for a little over $3,100, or about 3 months worth of rent. Johnson's landlord, a partnership owned by Mark Musemensch, a Houston developer, had already accepted more than $4,200 in federal money in August to pay 4 months of rent, according to a copy of Johnson's rent ledger she provided the Tribune. So he had already accepted federal money from her. And so, yeah, no problem, right? No problem. Now, Johnson then caught COVID-19 afterwards, as many people have. She ended up missing a month of work as a result. Johnson had asked the office manager whether they received the latest check. They told her that there was no way to check if they had received it. However, the morning of her March 18th eviction hearing, a Texas rent relief staffer told Johnson that her landlord had actually cashed the check 2 days earlier. Remember, she goes in to say, "Did you get the check?" They said, "I don't know. We can't really see that. We don't know if we got the check." And turns out 2 days prior to that, they had already cashed it. And they even had the check number available. That was a recorded call by Johnson's lawyer. Now, when Dallas County Justice of the Peace Juan Yasso had heard about the check and the phone call, he asked the property manager whether they had received the check. Johnson said the property manager quickly confirmed that they had, and Yasso had tossed out the eviction. So in this case, you would think, wait, how is this worse? This is a win. She won. No, that same day, her landlord decided, we took the money and we got the money and you won. We improperly kicked you out. But now we're just going to decide not to renew your lease. That lease expires the following week. That right there is obvious cruelty. How dare you fight against me after I stole your money and tried to kick you out? How dare you win against our efforts to try to steal your money and kick you out? Or in this case, steal taxpayer money and then kick you out. We're just going to not renew your lease then. That's totally legal for us because we want you out anyway. You had the temerity to fight against me. Gone. Get out. And by the way, when we get out, and I can't confirm this, but what do you want to bet? How much do you want to bet that landlord turned around and raised the price on that apartment? You want to bet? You want to bet it was a decent amount of above a rent hike? I wouldn't be shocked. Look, honestly, this is something that we knew was happening. I mean, again, we had called it during the pandemic, right after the rent relief. There's going to be landlords that are going to take advantage of this. They're going to kick people out. They're going to steal the money. And they're going to raise the rents afterwards. We knew it, and this is his confirmation. And the reason they can do it is because they can. We have turned housing into a commodity. Shelter is a human right. Housing is a human right. Everyone has a right to have a safe place to sleep, to rest. But of course, in the United States, we don't believe that. I mean, we've commodified everything. Shelter, obviously a commodity. Food, commodity. Healthcare, oh, you betcha. We're going to commodify the shit out of it. And we, and we being the capital class, because remember, workers are not capitalists. The people with the capital are the capitalists. You're just a serf. You're a worker. Never forget that. The capitalists are going to take and take and take as much as they can, while the same companies buy up real estate and drive up the prices of the market by creating an artificial scarcity that they can then exploit by charging sky-high rents. Again, people who pay rent either cannot afford to buy a home or they're not able to be approved by banks for home loans that'll only give to a certain kind of person. The irony, of course, is that mortgages oftentimes are way more affordable than renting. And so the result of this, of course, is the situation where you have a lot of people who are very precariously living from hotel to, Airbnb, or living out of their cars, or just staying in places where maybe, You have a fixed time, a short time to rent, short-term housing, all of that stuff. And that's happening to the most vulnerable people. And this is the result of pure, unadulterated cruelty and greed. Housing is a systemic issue, and it requires a systemic approach to solve that issue. This was a Band-Aid, obviously, in this program. Did it help people? Of course. And that's good, but it didn't solve the problem. That problem being greed. That problem being the scarcity of affordable housing in this country. And so we need to fix that systemic issue so that stuff like this doesn't happen. And regular people do not get hurt or screwed or taken advantage of by this disgusting, broken system.